Hi everybody. About to start. I just wanted to give everybody a few more minutes to kind of funnel in. But let's get this thing started. My name is Jared, and I work at Galvanize. It's Jared, like the Gallery of Jewelry. If you've ever heard of that place. I just want to kind of get a feel for who's in the audience today. Who here is a product manager? Raise your hand. Who here wants to be a product manager?
By the way, this is not a hand raise, this is a hand raise.
Good point. If anybody would like to come up closer to the front, we've got a lot more seats left, by the way. So we've got a lot of seats up here, everybody who's funneling in the back. Who here is a software developer? Raise your hand. Cool. Who here has heard of Galvanize before? Raise your hand. Wow, it's everybody. Are you aware that we're in Galvanize? Raise your hand. Well, without any further ado, thank you for being here, everybody. We're going to kick this off. We'll start out by introducing our panelists. Let's start with Eric.
Microphones.
Yay!
Oh, I can hear myself. That's awful. I'm Eric Carlson. I'm Director of Product at Compost, which is a small startup up in Boulder. Actually, not so small anymore. I guess probably around 90 people now. I have about 10 years of product management experience on a whole weird, wide range of things. Ultimately, my background's in human factors, machine learning, and software development back before I got into the PM game. That's me.
Hello everyone, my name is Natty. I'm the Managing Director for Techstars in Boulder. I'm not really in a product role right now, but I've been in product for 8 years before this role, everything from 2-person companies to 100-person companies. So I have a range of experience. My background is in finance, design, software, and sort of startup-y stuff. So that's me. Thanks for coming.
Thanks. So my name is Dan Putsedley. I guess I'm the general manager for Pivotal Tracker. Who here has heard of Tracker, by the way? That's awesome. Okay, so I work for Pivotal. We started as a little consultancy in a little tiny room above the Gap in San Francisco and grew to what's now, I guess, about a 1,400-person company that does a bunch of things, all related to kind of modernizing how software is built. I used to be an engineer and then gradually became a PM, learned everything the hard way. And now I do a little bit more than just PM, but that's definitely my sort of most interesting part of my past.
My name is Jared Polivka, and I kind of have a diverse background, and I'm really excited about the panelists that are here today because they kind of have shaped my background, all three of you have, so thank you for being here. I moved from North Carolina in 2011 to Boulder because I read Do More Faster and because I read about Everlater, which Natty founded, and I was like, wow, that's awesome, I want to get into startups and I want to build things. And then I ended up working with Eric at Compost as a product manager, and we worked together very closely. I learned a lot from Eric, and I learned a lot from Mike Lewis. And I have Dan to thank for the tool Pivotal Tracker, which is what we use. And I have many dreams about using Pivotal Tracker and doing acceptance criteria and testing, and thank you, Dan. Before Galvanize, I served as a PM with Eric, and before that, I was a marketing manager at Uber, and I'm really glad that everybody's here today. Thank you for attending this panel. I'm just going to kick it off with the first question. What does being a product manager mean to you?
I think this is actually maybe the hardest question that you're asking today, because I think it's a really hard thing to define. To me, the product manager is sort of that person that's in the middle of everything that's going on. And by everything, I don't mean the stuff that's happening internally in the company, but also the things that are happening externally with the product and the customer base. So the product manager is really responsible for taking a lot of inputs and processing that and communicating what's happening in the product to the rest of the stakeholders that are involved, both internal and external. That doesn't mean that they're doing marketing copy, but it means that they're informing marketing on what the user behavior is within the product. So, I think about it as sort of that piece in the middle that's making a lot of connections between all the other functions and is really responsible for what is the product, what are we deciding to build, and really a deep understanding of what do the customers need, what are their needs, and what do they want the product to be. So I think that's probably my best definition of what a product manager is, but I think it's a sort of difficult function to define.
Yeah, not to copy too much of that, but to me it means getting to do something I love every day, and that means also not doing the same thing every day. It's the most multidisciplinary role within a company, right? So you have to be comfortable on the technical side, on the user side, on the business side, and put all those together. Really, the intersection of those three is sort of a brain teaser. Figuring out that solution that notches into those three just right, fits that bill, is ultimately just very, very satisfying. So I love it, and I sort of evolved to it naturally, but being a product manager now means I made it, and I get to do what I love.
Everything that they said, just to reiterate, it's such a broad range of skills, and the things that you have to do every day just depends on what you encounter that day, right? And I think the important thing is being able to adapt and be nimble and go from the sort of big picture, we're going to go after that hill, and here's why, right? And then actually get into the details and into the weeds and find an incremental path and work so closely with your engineering team, represent the business, represent the users, your communicator. But you also, I like to use military metaphors, even though sometimes I get really strange reactions to that, but like you're like the lieutenant of the squad or whatever that is going after that hill, and you're just equipped, and you are driving it. You're not necessarily doing all of the hands-on stuff, but you're close to it, right? And you can steer, and you can, encounter obstacles and find a way around it, right? The communication, I think, is the biggest piece of it. You are a communicator. You are channeling communication. You are a decider, or you are representing decisions, right? And you are communicating them.
Speaking of your squad, what's your team composition like?
Well, there's the ideal, the actual, where we are, where we're going. But I think the ideal team size, and it also depends on, what we're really talking about a product manager and the product manager's team. In a maybe sort of a medium to large situation where you have maybe like a 50-person group that is building a product, you actually have multiple, you want to think of yourself as one team. You want to celebrate your wins as one team. You want to be on a mission together towards something, but you're going to have multiple smaller groups of people, right? So whether those are the teams or those are your pods or squads or whatever you call them, at the level of the hands-on product manager, so let's say what might be called a product owner these days, right? There's one PM that's kind of the vision, the very external but very collaborative with the internal group. The PM is working with potentially, 2 or 3 or 4 product owners that represent and own specific areas. So putting myself in that position of the product owner, what is the ideal team? It's probably 4 to 6 developers. At Pivotal, we actually think of them as pairs because we're all about pairing. So for us, it's 2 to 3 pairs. It's so not necessarily a dedicated UX or product designer, but somebody available. So there's like a full-time UX role there as part of these teams or these pods. And then, the product owner, right? That's the squad, and then it's sort of surrounded by roles, or there are other roles that are part of the mix ideally, right? You sort of have an exploratory tester, sort of thinking across the whole system. Maybe they're embedded with the individual team or sub-pod, or they're kind of the team level and they represent the wider view. But you want to have those roles, and you don't want to be much bigger than that as the sort of tactical, on the ground, going after the hill squad.
So at Compost, we have been growing pretty quickly, and it recently brought up some interesting questions about team structure. Going from, I want to say, half a dozen developers up to 20 in the span of 6-9 months was an interesting test of our product structure, how we'd set up and how we wanted to operate. The decision we faced was, do we bring on additional PMs and define the scope of each PM narrowly to a slice of the product? So each product manager would own a narrow slice, and having that narrow slice would let us both do the strategic things, but also work your way down to the technical and really function as both a product manager and product owner. Or do we separate those product manager and product owner roles, have a product manager that handles more of the strategic side and an embedded product owner with the developers? I know there's a lot of debate about that. The danger of splitting the product manager role and the product owner role is that the product manager is the external facing. So you understand the market, you're spending a lot of time with users, you're analyzing usage, you're understanding the business cases, you really want that knowledge to be embedded in the product. So you want that person to be intimately connected to development. But on the practical side, what we found would happen is anytime engineering needs came up that demanded the product manager's time, they ultimately outweigh the strategic needs. Strategics is so squishy that it was very easy to say like, well, I'll devote an extra couple hours to engineering this week, and then I'll catch up on the strategic side next week, and we would never catch up. So we ultimately opted to bring in more product owners, have product owners own a narrow slice, but then the ultimate management of the product and ownership sort of the product concept at a higher level spans two. So we have right now 2 product managers split across 4 development teams. Each development team has a product owner that stays much closer to them. And then we try and overlap in the design space for a feature. And that's where we try and get some mind share established between the product manager and those external facing goals and the product owner who needs to know them for the nuts and bolts decisions of development. It's worked fairly well so far. I think that overlap is essential. If you have a clean break between the two, it'll break down. But I think it's the right thing to do.
Just one more thing, just to reiterate, that problem of how you slice your pods or teams within your product is like the hardest thing ever, right? And what might make sense today might not make sense, a month from now, depending on what you're working on. If you go really vertical, that's nice because the POs and those teams can really just execute, right? They're pretty isolated, they can go top to bottom, right? Ideally, those are kind of attached to certain isolatable or naturally separatable parts of the code base in the application, but then you end up with silos, right? And then when you do something that spans across them, it's really hard. So when you can also slice like horizontally, front end, middle end, back end, right? But then every single feature that you do ends up spanning these things, and then like you're having nothing but meetings and like assumptions about dependencies. Now you have to have whatever Jira or something that lets you, express dependencies, and it's crazy, right? So the ideal is somewhere between the two, and it also depends on the day.
How many people here work for a company that has fewer than 15 people in it? How many people work for a company that has over 100 people in it? Dang, pretty even. How many people are in the middle who didn't raise their hand for the others? Okay. I wanted to make sure that we were tailoring the answer to who's in the audience here, and unfortunately, I don't think there's enough of a trend to have one answer, but I think everything that these gentlemen said was spot on. The only thing that I would add is that I think there's been a shift, and a valuable resource that on the ideal product team is someone dedicated to analytics and quantitative assessment of what's happening in the product, because that's just so fundamental to understanding how it's going. And if you can afford it, someone who's doing the qualitative side. So a customer researcher. We at MapWest, where I ran consumer products previously, we didn't have the budget to have those folks on every single product team, but we had them in the product team, and they rotated around through the different squads. And each squad was the product manager, 6 to 10 engineers, and a designer usually. But we had this qualitative lead and a quantitative lead, and those people were responsible for understanding the user experience and the user behaviors across all of the products, and then bringing that insight into each one of those teams. And if you can afford that, that was the best money we ever spent, because our products were so much better by having dedicated resources who were bringing that insight into the strategic conversation. So that's the only thing I would add to the recommendations that they had on the ideal side. On the realistic side, you got what you got, and a product manager always has fewer resources than they need, and so you sort of have to balance that. And that's where the comments earlier around having to wear many hats and be responsible for a lot of different functions. Usually the PM has to backfill when you're missing one of those key skill sets. So you're in there looking at Google Analytics or Omniture or Mixpanel. You're out there talking with customers at the coffee shop and doing quick beta testing. You're running wireframes by potential users. The product manager, if you don't have that role, that's what you have to do. And so even if you're not trained in that or skilled on it, just reading up on it, practicing it, going out there and not being afraid to test those things and dive in is a phenomenal skill to being a great product manager. So, I think that probably, if I had to describe a trait of the best product managers I've seen, it's a fearlessness, because you have to do all these things, but you never have the resources you need, so just go do it. And if you're wrong, right? Just make sure every cycle is as minimal as possible and you're getting maximum learning. So, I think the reality is there's this ideal team that very few companies can afford to have happen. In the real case, hire as many of those positions as you can, and where you can't, you as the product manager have to fill that role.
Natty, I know you're a big proponent of Agile. I guess I just wanted to ask you guys, what is your flavor of Agile, and how do you structure kind of your iterations and your flow? What's your ideal iteration?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I am passionate about it. I'm passionate about anything agile and lean, and there's some folks in here who actually just went through Techstars, and they can, if you want to ask them about it, we preach lean theories all day, every day, probably obnoxiously. But I actually did a talk about this at last Denver Startup Week around how at MapQuest we structured our team, and so we had this playbook, and we had how we get work done, how we organize ourselves, and what we prioritize are three different things. And I'm happy to go into any of those, but on how we get work done, we did a sort of modified Scrum at MapQuest where it was basically Scrum but modified for how our teams were set up and how our executive structure wanted products delivered. But I highly encourage any sort of lean methodology. What you're trying to optimize for is the fastest iterations and the lowest amount of time to learning possible. You're not optimizing for how fast you're going to ship products, although usually that is an outcome of that. What you're optimizing for in any lean process is fastest time to learning. And that may mean you have to ship a product to learn, but it also may mean that you go out and you talk to customers instead of shipping a product. So the thing that I always encourage product managers to optimize for is how fast can you make the learnings so that you make fewer mistakes and you start making the right product sooner. And that's what Lean and Agile and Scrum is all designed to do. So from a high level, any method or flavor of Agile I recommend. If you're not doing that, let's talk afterwards and I can give you some quick tips on how to make the transition.
We also work as Agile teams. It'd be a real surprise if anyone sat up here and said, we're waterfall. But we work in Agile on top of the normal process. So really, the most important thing I've learned doing Agile is that there's no one process that works for any team or even any feature. So there's no canonical implementation of Agile, or if there is, it doesn't exist in the real world anywhere. We have experimented a lot with the structure of how we lay out our iterations. We actually just moved from 2-week to 1-week iterations. We've also tried 3 weeks. That was a bad idea. But it is very much worth experimenting with. Even every few months, try to throw a curveball in and see what works for your team. We found that 1-week iterations for the team we have right now and for the features we're working on really work best. The other thing that I'll mention, we adapted. We had been pointing in the same meeting where we were determining iteration goals, and that's how I was kind of used to doing things. And we recently broke that apart. So prior to an iteration, we now meet up about halfway through the prior week to go through the feature and point. And what that's allowed us to do is bring the developers into the process. And if they point out things that, hey, have you thought of this? Are you doing that? Why are we doing it this way? Spreading out, giving yourself some time between pointing and determining iteration goals allows you time to go back and to chew on it and to sort of take that feedback into the process. One of the best things about Agile is that it's a team sport. Everyone there has mind share for what you're doing. The developers are involved in the concept. They understand why they're able to chip in. So spreading those two things apart just allows them to give feedback better.
Can you raise your hand if you're familiar with t-shirt sizing and pointing? Just want to make sure that we're all using the same terminology. So, Eric, do you want to just give a brief?
Sure, absolutely. So in Agile you have stories, and then stories you are assigning points to. Now points at the end of the day, what you're interested in may be how long is it going to take to develop these features. At Compost anyway, points though are a proxy for complexity, and I think that's baked into the definition of Agile. In fact, the idea is that it's very difficult to look at a feature and say, how long is this going to take? Anyone with a development background knows that's hard. I was terrible at it when I was a developer. I was off by a factor of 3 to 4 usually. Timing is really hard to estimate. Complexity and unknowns are easier to estimate. And so you can look at each story and say, how many points of complexity is that? We use a 3-point scale. I've been trying to push my team to Fibonacci for a long time now, mostly for nerdy reasons, but I like a more granular pointing scale. Lead developer on one of the teams doesn't, so we're a 3-point scale. But ultimately, we're assigning points to complexity, and then over time, as you develop a velocity for your team, you begin to get an average for how that complexity translates into time, and that lets you estimate how long a feature is going to take to implement.
You said so many amazing things. I have nothing to say. But just to maybe elaborate on that last point a little bit, it's absolutely about complexity, but for us, it's even more about, it's about the conversation, right? So you're not really trying to measure actual complexity or eventually map it to time. That'll just all kind of work itself out. You want to be consistent, right? But that rhythm of estimating, and we do it weekly, right? It's always been sort of a weekly thing. Iterations are these sort of like, they're just guideposts, and they give you a structure for some process, like getting together in a room and talking about what you're about to do, working through that, estimating as a team. And by the way, team sport really resonates. Lately, I've been weaving into every single conversation that I have with people around anything to do with this. Team sport, team sport, team sport. Software is a team sport, so that's huge. But yeah, the weekly rhythm, the iteration is more about just having a rhythm, right? Getting into a room. These are the things. Here, we're on this mission, remember? So we don't forget. This is our roadmap, just to kind of reiterate every week, right? Then get into, these are the stories we're going to make our way through. Let's estimate them as a team. And we're doing that because it drives the conversation. Looking at something and thinking about complexity makes you start wondering about assumptions. Like, well, does it include, I don't know, IE support? No. Okay, good, because I was going to say it's an 8-point story otherwise, right? So you're uncovering these things, you're asking questions, you're learning just through that conversation. And the PM, this is just this huge opportunity to refine, to reprioritize, to pull things out that might have been assumed to be part of a given story, right? And you do it as a team, you go around the room, you put your hand up, right? Like 1, 2, 3, 1. And when you have everybody with their hand up saying 1, except one person in the corner saying 5, right? That is a signal for some sort of an assumption that has been made differently. Great, let's uncover it. Let's clarify the assumption. You learn something, maybe you create a separate story for the harder part that only one person thought about and you didn't. Throw it on ice, right? Maybe it comes back into the backlog later, maybe it's less important, right? So that is such a key part of it. And the rhythm is really just, get in a room, have a retrospective at the end of the iteration, and the retrospective in my mind is like one of the most important parts of being Agile, right? Agile means so many things to different people. It's been like repurposed to mean like some bad things, right? People are like, well, we're post-Agile now. And I've never understood what that meant. Like post-Agile, if you define Agile to be, you're evolving, you're nimble, right? You're course correcting. What is the post of that, right? You're no longer doing that. But regardless, the retrospective is where you identify what's working, what's not working, let some steam out, have a beer, and identify ways to course correct, right? With whatever is not working and double down on things that are working. And I think that's what really being Agile is.
I just want to second the retro part. Retros are super important. I've worked at companies before where it was too big of a time investment, so when they were looking to get leaner, that's the part they tried to cut, or did cut, and that really, it saps away the team identity, it takes away appreciation for the engineer's work, and it allows less opportunity to do that discussion and have everyone gain that common understanding. Really try to make time for the retro. It's well worth it. It's a hard thing to quantify, which is funny for a PM to say, but it's a super important part of the Agile process.
So how do you organize your research for product planning? How do you go about it?
Yeah, so I've become a fan of something called dual track Agile or dual track Scrum recently. And really all that means is you make a roadmap for research as well. So dual track Agile separates things into a development track. So these are things that are baked and ready to develop. It's sort of the execution track where you have things that can go in the icebox, developers can pick them off and work through them. And then you have your research track, projects that are coming up. Maybe it aligns with the roadmap, maybe you have to do these things, or maybe they're squishy or you just want to find out about something. You can lay out that research roadmap. Doing that allows you to explicitly plan for it, make time for it, and then apply the Agile process to yourself too. It's not just a development tool, it's something that you can take and apply to yourself to make sure you have time, to make sure you understand your own goals and deadlines. So I'm a big fan of that. And then once you're on that track, I would also just emphasize sharing that with your team. I spend a lot of time talking to my teams. Sharing it with your team is important. Sharing it around the company is important. One of the things that gets lost between product and even development teams, but also product and other departments in the company, tends to be the why. You'll tell people what you're developing, here's our roadmap, you can slap it up on a monitor somewhere and point to it. But if you don't describe why the roadmap is what it is, then they're not getting the full value they need to have faith in your decisions and then to go forth and market and sell and do that sort of thing. So it's really important to distill that research in a way that other people can get their hands on it too.
I think research is the most powerful tool that any PM has in their pocket, because what I've seen is if you don't do your research and you don't have your feelers into what's happening in the product and what your customers want, the other stakeholders start driving the roadmap. And that's the worst place to end up, because all of a sudden you are just executing what someone else envisions, and it's unlikely that what someone else envisions is what your customers actually want. So research is so important in your toolkit. And so I think both on the qualitative and quantitative side, the more time you can spend researching your users, what are their patterns, what do they need, what do they want, then you can start turning that into the why you choose to build one feature over another feature. And then when you have pushback from stakeholders, which inevitably happens, you have unbiased, objective information around why you made the decision to go that way. Or if you have to set the roadmap and you have to present that, you're not going in there saying, well, I think users want this, or I heard from one user we want this. You need that research to make a case, to control your destiny and control your roadmap. And at the end of the day, PMs are working for the users, right? You are the advocate for the users and what they need. So if you don't know what they want and you're not doing that research and you're going off of your hunch, the likelihood of you being wrong is just incredibly high. And things change. So you have to always be out there getting the pulse and seeing what's happening in your product. So to me, the research is that underlying foundation. It's the most powerful tool you have in the toolkit, and it's the biggest protector or armor that you have as a PM to control your destiny, especially if you're in an environment. Like if you raise your hand and you're in a company of over 100 people, I'm sure you're feeling this pain where your roadmap is just getting whipsawed left and right from executive A who prefers this design, or executive B who, their son-in-law thinks this about the product, and so they bring it in, and all of a sudden you are like, what am I doing here? That's the worst place you can be. So do the research. And it's super hard, but that's why I said earlier, like, if you can hire people to do qualitative and quantitative research for you, best hires. I would trade an engineer for a qualitative or quantitative researcher in a heartbeat. So, my 2 cents.
Yeah, you don't want to be the PM who basically just justifies why we're doing something because you think it's a good idea, but it's tempting. I mean, a lot of PMs, they tend to be pretty smart, or they think they're smart. I don't know about myself, but I sometimes trust my intuition and judgment a little too much, and I always know what the solution is, and I know what we need to do, right? And I've learned over time that I don't always know. I mean, there's a little bit of sort of intuition and there's a vision, right? But it should totally be backed by very concrete things, right? And even just to represent that in front of your team, you can't represent it if it's really just because I think it's a good idea, right? Eventually you just lose trust. People will not want to work on that team, right? It has to be deep. The other thing I want to say is, I think kind of parallels what you've been talking about, or what you were talking about with the dual track. We try to sort of put it more under a kind of the design roadmap, right? There is the roadmap, which is what problems are we trying to solve, or what are the goals, right? We want to increase the appeal of our product to product managers, as an example, right? So, well, obviously the next question there is, well, why is it not appealing currently? Is it because they're not aware of it? Is it because it doesn't have certain features? It doesn't solve certain problems, right? But we try to frame our design, so we kind of have sort of big picture design, and we have more sort of inline design that goes along with, we're actually working on something, we have stories, and sometimes even our developers are pairing with designers to sort of flesh things out. But the bigger picture design is more product design, and it starts with research, right? And so that's where I think there's an opportunity for the product owner or PM to collaborate. Really, you spend a lot of time with the product designer, right? And again, there's a whole other conversation or panel about what design is, right? And like the spectrum of that. But assuming design means like product design, you are starting with framing the problem. You are getting into who are we really considering here, what type of people, finding those people to talk to them. And you know, when you have an existing product, and we have this luxury, right, like Tracker's used by a lot of people, so we can, you know, pretty much go in any direction and like run into somebody using it, and cool. So we're considering PMs. Hell, this room right here would be really awesome for some product research. So Matt, if you can just close the door, we're gonna do everybody. No, but seriously, right? Like, find some way to access to people that you are trying to solve for. Look at how they work. Look at what they're doing. Look at what they're running into. What is their problem? Perhaps they're solving it today in some way, right? Like PMs reporting progress to their stakeholders. Well, how are they doing that right now, right? Let's actually ask them for the specific things that they share with their stakeholders. Can we have that? Maybe you can, whatever, null out some stuff in there, but like, can we please have that? Because that really gets at the needs, and then we can start designing solutions for those needs, right? So to me, like, research is somewhat kind of tied or coupled with product design, right? If that's the kind of design that you're doing, I think that's the right kind of design, that's the right way to approach it. And then also just, you know, having tools in place, like Mixpanel, right? You can actually find people that are doing things with your product just based on, you know, what Mixpanel tells you. You can narrow, you can scope it down to, I want to find people in the city I am today that frequently use this particular feature or don't, or use it in this particular way, and narrow it down and reach out to them and say, hey, you know, you don't want to be like, well, we've been watching, right? But there is a, you know, we noticed that you've been using our product heavily, and you know, most of the time you know what people are just based on LinkedIn, right? So it's not like that creepy to assume that, you know why they are a product manager, but like, use all these different tools to get to those people. Surveys are also useful, right? So maybe that's the next question, is the execution on how you do the research, but I think it's a mix, right? Talking to people should be number one, right? And that's part of the research, surveys, other things. And on that topic.
How did you know?
Right, so how do we understand our users, right? I mean, this is, again, like, as a product manager, this is like maybe your number one, you know, mission, to really understand them, because you have to represent them, and you can't solve their problems and their needs, right, without understanding them. Maybe this was a previous question, right? Like, without the research, there are people that can get away with just knowing, right? Like, I know, and it's that vision thing, like, we shouldn't discount it, right? Like, maybe you arrived at that vision based because you were in that world, or maybe you're just amazingly smart and you can imagine all these things and you read a lot of things at night. But you know, Elon Musk, for example, or Steve Jobs, like, they were the visionaries. They just knew, they just know they're brilliant, they're not human, right? And we all have a little bit of that in us, right? But not enough of it to just do it. So yeah, so understanding users, again, you have to know what, like, you know, break them down into personas. I mean, that's kind of an old thing, but like, that really works, right? So we want to, you know, make our product better for product managers. There's an obvious persona there, but maybe that breaks down. There's like different types of product managers, like big, you know, managing 100-person, you know, group that's building something massive, down to the CEO of a small startup that's basically, you know, playing that role because they have nobody else, and they're doing everything, including product management. So, and that lets you maybe even prioritize, like, well, which one of these are we going after? Are we talking about the big PM or the small PM? You know, maybe give them names, put pictures on them. That helps to really just kind of imagine and put yourself in their shoes. And then again, what are they trying to do, right? What are their needs? Which of these are we trying to solve for? And that segues into, well, how can we solve these things? And then you can start testing some of these, right? And you know, how you test, of course, depends on the situation, but that puts you in a good position, right? And again, going out there and talking to people just uncovers so much and shatters so many assumptions, because you really just have no idea until you get in there.
So I think sometimes companies put too much emphasis on looking at usage data when they talk about research. You can A/B test, you can look at how people use your product, but ultimately that's people drawing inside the lines that you're giving them. And so it can only tell you so much. So personas are an excellent example of trying to break out of that and really understand your users and who they are, more than just how they interact with your product. The other thing I'll add to that, and this is a bit of human factors nerdy from my background, but getting out and looking at users' contexts for using your products is very important. So are they using your products as one of 50 tabs while they're doing 20 other things? Are they using your products while they're walking from meeting to meeting? Are they using them on the road as they're driving to work? Looking at just the overall context and how people are considering how they're interacting, not just with your product, but what else is in their mind while they're doing that, can reveal some important things and lead you in research directions that you wouldn't have expected otherwise. Personas tend to focus on who is this person, but expanding on that to what do they do, how do they work, making it pretty broad can be very useful. Now you end up with this sort of book of a fictional person, which no one ever reads, so that's not useful, so don't go overboard with it. But definitely looking beyond stats and A/B tests is very valuable.
Yeah, the way I have a sort of another dimension of that, and the way that we've used personas and I highly recommend them, but a different way to think about personas that I've found more effective than the demographic personas, which are most common, and if you read 90% of the literature on personas, they are demographic personas, which is female, age 35 to 48, median income. That's actually really not that helpful. What's better are situational personas. And I highly recommend you change that, or not change, because I think both are valuable, but spend some time thinking about what are instead of defining personas by demographic, define it by situation. So I'll give you an example. When we were at MapQuest, everyone, well, I shouldn't say everyone, a lot of older people use MapQuest. Younger people are starting to adopt it again. I highly recommend it, it's awesome. But what we found was when we did personas, it was like 75% of the US qualified in like our 3 personas. That's not really that actionable. So we took new personas. How about the persona which is the person who lands at the airport for the first time in a new city on a business trip? I can actually develop products for that person much easier than I can develop products for the 50 to 60-year-old male from the South, right? I know when that person gets to the airport, what do they want to see in a mapping application? What are their concerns? What are their anxieties? Where do they most want to go? So should I put up a hey, do you want to rent a car button that shows up when I see you're at an airport? Do I want to put a here's some quick eats before you get on your flight button when I see that they just went to a rental car place and then went into the terminal? So those, if you change your personas to what are the situational personas that you want to appeal to, it can usually give you a little bit more actionable strategies in your product development. You still probably want to tie those to actual demographic personas, but I think it's a nuance, it's a little bit more powerful. And then the second thing that I highly recommend are customer journey maps. And there's a ton of literature on those, but I think it's the best way to sort of understand the experience with your product, because the reality is the experience with your product is not just the usage of your product, it's the whole experience around it. When did they realize they had a problem? What's the research they did to find a solution? What are the criteria that they had in their head to make a decision around which tool they wanted to use to solve that problem? Their experience with your product. Do they refer your product to other people? Do they cancel your product? Like, you've got to understand that whole ecosystem, and the best framework I know to do that is customer journey mapping. So I would Google that, look it up. There's a ton of great free literature on that. If you find anything from the Stanford D School, that's sort of the best stuff that I found.
So we're focusing a lot on qualitative research with this, and especially, these are all qualitative techniques. Do you guys have any resources or recommendations for the audience? I mean, just the simple act of being the detective and asking questions, there's a lot on just how to formulate your questions and how to ask good questions. Do you have any resources that you'd like to share with the audience, just for some of the people who want to be PMs or who want to refine their process? Do you have any good places to start?
So if you look in the formal field of human factors, there's cognitive work analysis and cognitive task analysis. If you look those up, those provide really good places to start to, these are formal breakdowns of how people behave in context. So while they're doing a task, the differences are minor between the two. One tries to posit internal states and actually figure out what the person's thinking. Another says it doesn't matter, it only matters how they behave. But those fields are good things. There's Wikipedia articles that are getting started on both. And then, to his point, demographics is so easy. Everyone kind of knows how to do it. But look up ethnographic surveying, and you want your personas to be a lot more ethnographic than they are demographic. Googleable terms.
I don't think there's I don't know of a silver bullet for how to ask good questions or a great resource on that. I think you get better at asking questions the more you do it, and the more you immerse yourself with your users and get to know them, you'll figure out what are the important questions to ask.
Just one thing that we found useful recently when talking to people is you obviously want to get at the needs, right? And kind of take biases out of it, but sometimes just asking, well, how would you solve this, right? How would you like to solve? Kind of reframes the thinking a little bit. And you don't want to jump right into that. You really want to get at the needs, beyond I just want this button, right? But there is sort of a progression toward that, and get people to start thinking constructively about your product. It kind of puts them in a different position, and they start thinking about it differently.
So one more thing on that topic. My cheat sheet, when I'm sitting in front of a user asking questions and trying to figure out how they work, there are usually 5 areas that I try and think on, and I actually write them down in my notebook, so as we're talking, I remember to try to think from those perspectives. So I'll look at their objectives, what are they trying to accomplish? I'll look at their tasks, how are they breaking down progress toward those objectives into discrete chunks of work? What are their methods for accomplishing those tasks? What artifacts in the environment come out of that? So do they have Post-it notes plastered all over the place? Do they write on their hand? Do they just memorize everything? What artifacts in the environment? And then the last is the environment. So document the context inside of which they're working. Just having those 5 things sitting in front of you while you're interviewing users, or maybe if you're lucky enough to get to shadow your users for a day and just watch how they work, those are the things to keep in mind and really focus on.
How do you approach hypothesis creation and testing? So you always have assumptions. Sometimes you test it with research, and your research will shatter your assumptions. And then sometimes it seems like the only way to really get feedback is to build something. So how do you go about creating a hypothesis and testing it as a PM?
General methods, yeah, that's hard. The one thing that jumps to mind there is definitely use hypotheses. I remember learning about the scientific method in like 3rd grade or something, and thinking, why do you need to take a guess before you learn anything? You just look and then you say what you found. But there's no such thing as looking in an unbiased way, right? There's no such thing as neutral observation. Or if you do that, you're not going to get anywhere you want to be. Hypotheses are really there so that you can structure your observation, so you know who to talk to and what to look at. Beyond that, I'm afraid I don't know of any general way besides doing it a whole bunch and trying until you find a method that works for you.
Yeah, I think you hit on a really powerful thing, which is it's so easy to just go out and do a test and then see the learning and be like, yep, okay, that's what I thought was going to happen. But the way our brains work, you're actually unable to recollect what you actually thought was going to happen beforehand if you didn't write it down and put it somewhere else. And if you're not comparing what you thought was going to happen with what happened, even if it's accurate, you're not learning. You're just not learning. And one sort of personal motto I have is no theory, no learning. So if you don't have a theory about something, you're unable to learn about it. So it's not about being right, it's about learning. And so just do it, just write it down, have a hypothesis. I think that was spot on.
Yeah, this is a big topic, and there's just such a range here, right? And it also depends on like what you are focused on, right? If you're building a brand new product, right, it's probably a lot easier. And I should say, I think it's no matter what, it's good to frame the problems with some sort of a hypothesis. We think this will solve this, and here's how we're going to know that it solved it, right? And so ideally, there's some metrics around everything, right? It's not always conclusive, right? You say, well, we want at least 1,000 person using this, every day, or this many times, maybe in terms of frequency or engagement or whatever, right? But it's never black and white as to what is successful enough, right? It's like, well, it's 23% of our users, not that high, but it's also which users are they? Oh, these are the really important ones, so actually it's more important. So anyway, framing it in a way that gets us close to being able to measure is ideal. But then in terms of like how do you test it, depends on what it is, right? Like in our case, and we've been very guilty of doing really big things for a long time before getting enough validation that it's actually going to work, because you get sort of into this, and some of it's real, right? You can't just put something out there that's completely simplistic, right? Obviously, there's a lot of testing you can do just manually, right? Like mock something up, mock up a couple things and like walk through it with people and say, is this going to really address your needs? And you can kind of gauge based on the reactions, or you can kind of get into the sort of concrete things, and you start to feel better about the testing, but ultimately you might have to build something. So for a new app, probably you can start with simple things, or even like landing pages that are like, oh, I want to do that. Now you're measuring clicks, toward that. You're testing people's kind of interest in it, or like some sort of action around it, but you haven't built it. When you've got maybe a mature product, it's a little hard to do that because the solutions might need to be a little bit more involved. And if you put something out there that's like really minimal, it's probably not enough. Like it might give you false signals, like it might give you false negatives because you haven't sort of connected the pieces. So you've got to connect the pieces enough, but then there's this danger of, we're going to work for 6 months and build this amazing feature. It's going to have falcon wing doors, right? And they're going to love it. It's going to be great. And then you launch it and you get like 17% or whatever in Mixpanel. And then it's like, well, is it because the pieces are connected? They're not connected enough yet. There are not enough pieces there, right? It's not discoverable, right? People just don't like it. It's not solving their needs. So then you've got to really dig into it and start asking why, right? Like, why is it only 70%? Okay, well, why that? And then maybe you get into some of the multiple why kind of experiments. And ultimately, you might have to go talk to people. Why is this not working for you, right? And then there's maybe other things you have to consider.
So we covered qualitative research and hypothesis testing. In an ideal world, if we're at Airbnbs, let's say, every team has a data scientist on the team. That's amazing. So how do you build data collection into your product process and into your product? And how do you decide what to collect? There's so much data that you could collect on users and their behavior. How do you navigate that process?
Well, if you're the NSA, it's very simple. You just collect it all. But it is actually, it's not an unreasonable starting point, right? Especially if you're building something new, right? If you've got an existing app that has 1 million touch points, right? Maybe it's a little harder to kind of retrofit, but these days there's such good tools for this. Like, we're pretty big fans of Mixpanel because it's just really easy to hook up. I mean, regardless of what kind of an app it is, web or mobile, it's easy to hook up and you can start sort of instrumenting, pretty much everything. There is a downside. You start building up so much data, and then your Mixpanel monthly bill gets huge. But kudos to them. They build a great tool, and like, we're super happy to give them a ton of money every month because we have such good access and such good visibility to what people are doing, and you can slice it, arbitrary ways. You can build sort of funnels in it. You can segment. You can, even look at what people are doing live. It's a little creepy, right? Because you like literally see people's faces. Oh, this person just clicked this button, and then they did this, and this is where they are right now. Okay, maybe I shouldn't be saying that. I'm gonna, people are like, I'm not using Tracker anymore because it's spying on me. But I mean, these days, that's just what you have to do, and obviously, it's done in the with the intent of having this awareness that allows you to make your product better, right? So I think everybody, is very conscious of using this data in a very kind of sensitive way, and we certainly do. But the cool thing is that you can instrument pretty much anything, right? And there are now great tools that collect this data, and they actually make it really easy to understand and analyze and kind of go deep, and just to kind of get a pulse of what's going on with your application. And without that visibility, you're just blind. You're just super blind.
So we use Mixpanel as well, and it's led to an interesting problem for which I don't know of a good solution, so if anyone knows one out there and wants to tell me after, that'd be great. But when we develop a feature, we come up with a laundry list of things we want to track about that. We build in, Mixpanel's great because you can do it really quickly, low effort. When we start getting that data, we can look at it. Mixpanel was turned into a tool where for PMs you go in to check one thing, and then 4 hours later, it's like going to TV tropes on the internet, right? Just disappear into it. So the data there is great. There's a ton of data. The piece that I'm missing, this is a problem of having too good a data, is I can set up funnels to look for patterns that I think of. I can look for things that confirm what I already know to look for. What I'm missing is a way to find a fingerprint in data that means something, so some common pattern that's meaningful, and have something tell me that it's something to look out for, right? So I'm really right now on the hunt for a good like pattern analysis tool that I can plug into Mixpanel data, so that I can start looking at those common patterns and know, and then go out in the field, talk to users, and figure out what that means. If anyone knows of one, please tell me.
I think all the tools have their pros and cons, so instead of focusing on tools, my recommendation is start with the hypothesis and make sure you're testing and you can get results back from that hypothesis, and that's how you should start figuring out what you're going to track and collect. And then I sort of think about it the same way that the engineers in here probably think about testing, which is if you go aim for 100% test coverage, all you're doing is writing tests. So if you aim for 100% data coverage, tracking everything, but beyond just sort of the basic install, you're going to spend your whole time analyzing data and not actually finding insights or taking action on them. So I think about it as test all of your hypotheses, build tracking around all of your hypotheses, get the high-level metrics and data that comes for free from almost any application that you install. And then just like in testing, you write tests for the high-risk areas of your product, and you write tests when a bug happens so that it doesn't happen again. So I would take the same approach with when you tag something to track it, is it high value? Is there high value? Tag it. If something breaks because of something or there's a risk point, tag that as well. So that's how I would start, and hopefully that's just sort of a practical way to not spend your whole time tagging and tracking in whatever tool you choose.
Just to tie back to something we were discussing earlier, right? Like having that broad coverage of instrumentation, say with Mixpanel, right? Again, you have to know what you're looking for. You have to have some hypothesis before you go in there. Or if you do sort of a data science project on your usage data, right? Like that's not just like, well, data science, tell me some things I don't know, right? Like just tell me what I should do or what should we build. Like that would be pretty awesome, right? It just looks for patterns and makes recommendations. Like that would be amazing. Maybe one day we'll get there, right? So you have to really start, like you have to know your world and your users enough to make these sort of like hypotheses or guesses, and then you go validate them or verify them with the data. But the other thing you get here is like, you never know what you might want to dive into, right? Like 6 months later, we're considering improving something around how stories get deleted. So great, now we have this data, we can dig in and see how often this certain problem happens and who is it happening to. Like maybe there is something interesting there, and then it also lets you actually reach out to those people and say, we've noticed that you delete stories a lot. Right? Like, why? Are you doing it on purpose? No. Again, you don't want to be creepy about it, like we just kind of show up like, here we are, right? But you can. Like, Mixpanel actually lets you do that. You can literally just like target people who delete stories more than 10 times a day, and something else, and do it in the morning, not in the afternoon, and like push a button and a little notification or a little thing pops up with your face on it. Hi, I'm Dan. I'd like to know why you're deleting so many stories. Like you could do that so easily. Obviously, you have to be a little bit, conscious of, how you exercise this power, but it's very powerful.
There's a lot of literature on this topic, but how do you prioritize your roadmap, and how do you decide what to build?
And I'm the lucky one with the microphone hit. It gets to go first on this one. This is hard. I mean, this is also just like this is who you are as a product manager, right? You have to be thinking about this all the time. You have to be talking to people. You have to be kind of getting inputs from various stakeholders, maybe a little bit of like, you just have to sort of pick a direction and go, but tie it to concrete things, right? Like having a mix of strategic things on the roadmap and tactical, so you can kind of keep shipping some things while you work towards something bigger, representing it in some form. But I think keeping it lightweight is important, because you can get really into like, we're going to build this elaborate roadmap, and then what is that? Well, that's like a Gantt chart, right? And like Microsoft Project with like all these dependency assumptions, and it gets all complex, and then like 3 weeks later, like your world is changed. You've learned some things, whatever stuff happened. Oh my God, how are we gonna, modify this roadmap? So, I mean, what we do is we keep a roadmap in basically just a Google spreadsheet, right? And it's simple. And we call these things like big epics or portfolio epics or whatever. These represent the sort of again, not necessarily features. Sometimes they are like bigger features, but they're more like problems to solve, right? And this is your roadmap, and it's about prioritizing it and making it visible and clear. And this is your sort of, when you get into the weeds and you're like, oh man, all this stuff happened, and like there's bugs here, and somebody just said something and we need to respond to it, so we better do this. Like you can just kind of lose sight of what is your path, and so the roadmap represents your path. And it is an evolving thing, and you have to be able to evolve it as you go. But it's more just to kind of capture the mission, make it visible, right? That is the hill we're going toward, and these are the sort of big steps along the way. But all the things that go into prioritizing it, well, there are many, right? And this is, I don't think there's something very specific, like you do this and you do this and then you have a roadmap. And I struggle with this, right? Because this is hard. It's like, there's so many things you could do, right? There's things you have to test. There's just some things that you have to do because you're now this big company and you have to move your whatever recurring billing from this thing to that thing. Like, so I don't want to do it. It's got to be in the roadmap. We want to do these other things for our users, and it's balancing all these things, right? So you're the balancer, right? And good luck.
So roadmap planning is really hard because oftentimes you're comparing apples and oranges. You want one feature for this reason and this other feature for that other reason. The way I approach the problem is you don't prioritize features, you prioritize objectives. So what are you trying to accomplish right now? Whether those are high-level business or maybe one step below. So let's say your objectives at the company level are retention, so user retention or sales velocity. You can ascribe a priority to those, or maybe just a percentage priority where you want to spend 70% of your resources improving retention and 30% against velocity. Once you either prioritize or break up between those, then you can ascribe features to those objectives. So how well will this feature that you have in mind, how well will it serve retention, or how well will it serve velocity? It gives you a common denominator, or a common unit along which to compare features, and then you can fairly easily compare apples and apples. So you come up with some hypothesis of this feature will serve to improve retention by X, Y, and Z. This other feature will serve by ABC. I have some computational modeling in my background, so I tend to get quantitative with it then. Jared, I subjected to my my quantitative model spreadsheet, where you actually, like, as a team, we came up with a model of what we thought was driving these certain sort of business patterns that we were seeing. And then we could input features into that model and try and quantify the benefit of features against the objective, prioritize objectives. And it really makes coming up with one cohesive roadmap a lot easier, because now you have a common unit on which to compare objectives.
I love that model.
I totally agree with what they said, so I'll take a different track and give some separate feedback, which is, I think this is your goal also, which is should not be assumed that you will get to prioritize your roadmap as a PM. And it goes back to sort of my earlier comments around research being a really critical tool for you, is that, and again, especially those companies that are larger than a startup, there are a lot of people having an influence in prioritizing your roadmap for you, and your goal should be to establish your credibility, get the data, deliver results so that you can prioritize, and you're given the trust to prioritize that roadmap. So I think, first and foremost, this is your goal, is to have this problem. And to these guys' point, it is incredibly difficult to prioritize this stuff. The one other thing I would add is that I love a quote that Hemingway said, which he said, he sent someone a letter, and at the end he said, "I would have sent you a shorter letter if I had enough time." And I think that's an interesting way to think about product strategy also, which is, it's not about more, it's about quality. And don't go down the rabbit hole of trying to add feature after feature after feature because some users asked for it. Find out what really matters and make that part great, and spend a ton of time making that part great. Even if people are sort of on the periphery asking for things around it, it's rare that those things will actually make a difference. And so, I tend to focus on quality over quantity of features, and I love the perspective of going for it by objective as opposed to feature. So maybe a different way to answer that question.
So, how do you decide when to remove a feature?
I think it's something we should all do way more often. It's hard to dedicate the time to taking something out because especially when you have other stakeholders. They want to see progress moving forward, new stuff, additions, more and more and more. But actually, again, going back to my other comment, I sort of think less is more. And so we should be doing this a lot more often. I don't know that there's like a black and white answer on this. You can look at the data, you can look at your objective as a company, you can look at who your users are. Like as those things are changing and evolving and you're refining them, there's probably parts of your product that are less relevant and fewer people are using them. And it's great to trim the tree if you can. I think it's hard to get the approval and buy-in to spend the time doing it, but it's really worthwhile because all that stuff hangs around and has to be cleaned up eventually. And the further you go, the bigger the debt.
I should rephrase this question as how do you decide when to remove it or re-implement or redesign that same feature?
Would you like to reconsider your answer? This is a little bit, well, freebie would be overstating it, but it's a side benefit of looking at objectives when you're planning features. You're implementing a feature to accomplish a goal for your business. You know why you're putting this thing out there in the world. If you've thought ahead about that, it gives you a framework under which to analyze, is that doing what we wanted it to do? Maybe people are using it for something completely unrelated that you realize is useful too, but more often than not, it's not going to be, unless you're Twitter, no one's finding a use for features that you just like randomly throw out in the world. So for the most part, you can look at that feature and say, why did we build this? Is it accomplishing that thing? And then the decision whether to retool it or to just destroy it is a qualitative one that's very much feature by feature. A lot of that comes down to cost-benefit analysis of looking at what you would think it would take to retool it versus what the realistic likelihood is of getting that benefit out of there. That's also where user testing comes in. You know, if the decision between retooling and destroying something. You know, A/B testing is very popular right now. We'll implement it two ways. We'll do twice the work and then find out which way one works, or which way works. Google Ventures has a great graph on their website that I'm totally going to mangle trying to recollect it. But you know, the four-step process of design, implement, test, analyze, that's the typical cycle for a product. And that's A/B testing, what you're trying to do with the two different roads you want to go down. They have a graph where they crossed out develop and test, or develop and analyze. See, I told you I'd mangle it. But the point is, you can jump straight from design to analysis. You can do paper prototype walkthroughs. You can plug it in if you want to into something like InVision that lets you put clickable models. But just doing back of the napkin with users and putting it in front of them and saying, you know, here's your goal. What would you do? Where would you start? Okay, you did that, and then you scratch out another one. This is what you see then. How would that work? You can measure, it is possible to measure how well something will work before you retool it. So before you take something entirely behind the woodshed, it might be worth walking through with users on paper, whether you can retool it realistically or not. And that goes the same for new features too. You know, if, in an ideal world, I would love to sit up here and say that I've never implemented something that I didn't have, you know, user-driven proof that it would work. That would be a complete and total lie, but that is the standard that I'd love to get to someday, and there are ways to do it.
Yeah, we know this world. Our app's been around for a long time, and some of the earlier features were built because we thought they were a good idea, right? Just as like an engineer or pair working on it. You know, these days it's a very different world. But so there's a lot of features that we look at, and it's like, it's not being used that much. Be nice to get rid of it, right? But then you get into the getting rid of it has a cost, right? Even if it's just, there's still some number of people using it, and if you just rip it out, you have to worry about, how are we going to communicate that? Do we pre-communicate? Do we say, it's going to go away? Okay, and then they're going to react, and you say, no, please, don't make it go away. Okay, well, we won't. Or what, right? Like, is there a threshold? If only 10 people complain, then that's okay, we're still going to rip it out. Ripping it out then obviously has some complexity. Well, there's a button here. Okay, now the button's gone. Now this is empty space. Well, what are we going to put there? Well, move some things around, right? So that it kind of sort of pulls you in, and you have to do more. And then there's the, after the fact, right? I was using this feature, and I hate you because it's not there anymore. And I'm going to pull my entire team away from your product. So looking at it, it's how much of a cost is it to keep it, right? And there's some concrete things there, right? There is the code for it. It's really hard to maintain, right? Every time we touch something else, we have to go dig into this mess. Or there is sort of feature complexity, right? Like this feature is making other features more complicated because when it's in this mode that this feature represents, then other features have to work a different way, and it's hard to add new features because of this existing feature. Okay, great, now we have a real reason to consider removing it. Well, let's look at how it's getting used. And obviously there's an assumption that you already know that it's not getting heavy use, otherwise you wouldn't be thinking about removing it. So you go into Mixpanel, whatever, and you find that, well, there's 237 people a month that use this feature out of, whatever, some big number, so it's a low percentage. Okay, is that low enough to remove it? Well, that's not enough, right? Who are they? Why are they using it? And it might turn out that the people that are using this feature are actually all like CTOs or C whatever O's of your customers. And if you take that feature away, they'll be pissed. You don't want to piss them off, right? Okay, well, what are they using this for, right? Go after their needs, and that kind of goes back to what you guys are saying, right? Like, what was the original intent of this? Can it be solved in a different, better way, right? And the other thing is, maybe it's not getting used much because people don't know about it, right? And so you can't conclude, you can't jump to conclusions, right? Well, maybe only 237 people are using it because they happen to stumble upon it, right? And we didn't do a good enough job of promoting the feature or making it discoverable or making it intuitively understandable as to what it's for, right? So this is a big one. There's a lot that goes into it. And yeah, it doesn't happen enough in today's products, right? People are like, oh, it's my baby, I'm not gonna rip that out, or it's too hard, or, well, I know this person is using it and I don't want to piss them off, so we'll just leave it and move on to the next question.
SaaS definitely makes this harder because they're paying you and they like to know what they're getting by paying you. So when you change that, it's a hard conversation. If you're lucky enough to work on a product that you sell and forget, then I'm a little jealous.
I just want to double check with Hannah in the back. What time do we have the room until? Is it 1:15? We're good on time, just double checking. So we might skip one of the questions, but who here in the room has ever had their roadmap blown up by a stakeholder? Or somebody who's like, I need you to build this, screw everything else you're doing. Yeah, that's not cool. How do you guys deal with that?
So for me, I mentioned earlier the why is very important, and when you communicate with other groups and departments, the why really helps give you authority and also sort of establish that there is a direction, there is a reason, the roadmap is the roadmap, and it can lead very naturally to a conversation about the cost. So when something comes in, it gives you a basis to say, here's why we are going to do what we do. Now let's talk about why you want this and compare the two. It's a much more natural conversation than just, I like this feature, no, I like this feature. Ultimately, when you do have things cruise in that you just have to take on, I think that's an inevitable part of being a PM. The other part there, though, is a discussion of cost when things blow up. So it's not fair to expect sales to understand why their request is causing so many headaches. They live in sales world. They don't know development. They don't know how long you've been working on something and how jarring it is to change midstream, for example. So have a conversation around costs and try to take, just like when you're talking to your users and you're trying to understand their perspective, think of other groups in your company the same way. Treat them with kid gloves and make sure they understand exactly the cost of those requests. And over time, hopefully, you'll find that those requests go down anyway. They won't disappear entirely, though.
Yeah, I mean, this is what you just do as a PM, right? And you have to set your expectations. In fact, embrace this, right? Like, this is our roadmap based on what we know today, right? But we know that tomorrow something's going to come up. And maybe it's not these giant things like some big new customer wants this and they know you're CEO, right? And so that's a big one, it's a hard one, right? Go have some conversations, right? Like, whatever. But smaller things will always pop up, right? You're always going to learn, and the things popping up kind of represent the learning, right? Like maybe you ship something and that uncovered some new area, and so now you're getting requests for that, or bugs, or whatever, or like you realize there's something that doesn't quite fit. And so your roadmap better be nimble, and you should have a process around that roadmap, and your whole team should be nimble enough to handle it. But you don't want to be like constantly just reacting and reacting, because it's like, what are we doing, right? We're just reacting. It's stressful, it's hard. And so you've got to be that person who's maintain the balance of like, cool, we'll react to some things, right? Some things will just, lead us to updating our roadmap because we've learned some things, but let's not forget the roadmap. So it's this balance of like, we're going in that direction, but sometimes we might have to go around some things and pop up, and or realize that actually we should be over there, right? And that's perfectly fine, right? That's just part of being agile.
I think I'm gonna combine two questions together and kind of approach them. The first one is, how do you give the rest of the company and the other stakeholders visibility in the product and into your process, which is really important. I think we touched on it a little bit briefly earlier. And then also, how do you foster culture on your team and keep your team's morale high? And also on point with the vision.
Well, I've already prattled on about communicating why, so that's my trick for communicating roadmap, not just the roadmap, but the foundation behind it. On the culture side, I really like to do something that I think is sort of typically considered bad in Agile, which is my stand-ups last a long time in the mornings. I have I think half a dozen developers on the team that I do stand-up with every day. And they'll go 30 minutes some days, 40 minutes sometimes. Stand-up is the one part of every day where everyone's in the same room and putting their heads together. So if they want to dive into technical issues and have sort of a little mini retro and get some mind share in there, that's great. If you want to spend time joking around and showing your vacation pictures, that's not a bad thing either. I don't like to lead the stand-up as a sort of stay on topic. What did you do yesterday? What are you doing today? Are you blocked? Next. I think that is, and some people do that. Some Scrum Masters buy into that, and that's fine. I understand their point. But as the one touch point I have guaranteed with my team every day, I'll take that time to get to know them better, and I think we're better off for it.
What was the first part of the question again?
Visibility across.
Oh, right. I think that's just a key role of the PM is you spend a vast majority of your time communicating, and you should be good at it, and if you're not good at it, spend a bunch of time working on it and practice. But that's sort of, I feel like we've mentioned so many things that are critical in a PM's toolkit, but that's a big one. And then on the culture side, I think culture is potentially the only defensible thing that you have in your company, and so defining, culture really is how you make decisions and how you work, and so everything you do as the PM sets the tone for culture because you are that sort of person in the middle. So the decisions you make, the process you come to reach them, the way you empower your team, the way you interact with your team, the way you communicate, everything you do is watched by everyone else, and so you are really a key piece of setting the tone and the culture. So there's no right culture, there's a right culture for everyone and for every company, so you have to figure out what that is, and then you as the PM need to know that you're really important in terms of driving it and setting it. And so when you violate your culture, it has a huge impact because of your role.
For us, just to use some concrete examples, like Pivotal Labs started as a little tiny company, and our culture started as very much focused on just like common sense, get things down, make them real, concrete, break them down, right? Work in small teams, right? Everybody on the same page, same visibility, here's why we're doing it, like all that. But now, like Pivotal Labs is, I don't even know how many people, like maybe hundreds, 500, 600, 800, over, I don't know how many cities now, like 12, 15, 20. And so this has been like a big thing. How do we keep that culture as we grow, right? And so some things that stand out are, when you work as teams, right? Like when you have sort of like team culture, that's a pretty easy one versus you have a bunch of individuals working independently. Like what is culture in that sort of environment? People are just individuals doing work individually, right? When you have teams have a culture, right? You have a team culture. Moving people between teams on some reasonable, frequency helps as well. So you don't have silos. So if you have a company of 10 teams, don't like put them in different rooms and they never talk to each other, right? Obviously stand-ups, like big stand-ups help, but like actually moving people around but maintaining some consistency so that you have, continuity of just knowledge and what you're working on. For us, though, really the big thing is pairing, right? So because people pair, developers do, sometimes designers do, sometimes PMs do, but we really encourage pairing. Like, you are working with another person because that forces you to verbalize everything, right? Instead of like, I'm just going to do this. But that also has a benefit, like you have this continuous learning of not just like technical things or whatever product awareness, but like culture, right? You are sharing everything as you pair, and then as you move people around, you pair with new people, that really spreads and it keeps spreading, and it's the same culture. It evolves, but it doesn't sort of deteriorate, right? It just sort of improves. And this is how we managed to kind of scale up across all these different cities. Like, you pretty much go to any Pivotal Labs office and it's like, yeah, there's something very thick and similar between all of them, and it's good, right? And I think it's the teams, pairing, movement, right? And then stand-ups and like have some team events, like go out. We try to do at least once a year, like a picnic. Like, we're all of us, at least as a tracker team, we're gonna go out and have a picnic and spend the whole day not working, drinking low alcohol beer because it's all that's allowed there. Play games, like stupid games, do stupid things, but then like you feel like, we just kind of reconnected, and that keeps that culture going. And that's just one of the many ways, but those are some for us.
This is the last question before we open it up for Q&A. What's your advice to people who want to get into product management? All three of you have kind of gotten into the field in different ways. You each have your own unique story. And how would you suggest people in the audience make the shift, make the transition to becoming a product manager?
I think there are different directions into it, and they all have merit. Now, we talked about all these things that are important, and I think we sort of, what's come across that it isn't just this one thing. If you have this one skill, you're a great PM, or you will, do well in that role. It's definitely a spectrum that ranges from soft skills, right? Communication, maybe empathy, right? Like, kind of just reacting to things that happen with people and teams. On the other end of it is like some technical comfort level, right? Because these days apps are pretty deep, and if you're building mobile apps, you should be aware of the constraints and be a little bit on top of like what's going on in the industry. You have to be a little bit of a marketer, right? Like, you're building this for a market, you're trying to move it towards that. There's sort of a business aspect of it. So there's a spectrum, and there's many paths to it. And we see people come from different walks of life, and there is no like, this works, this doesn't work, right? I think you have to have a certain, like, this is the kind of thing you want to do. You want to sort of kind of organize and herd and move in a certain direction. You're comfortable sitting down with developers and like really kind of get into some technical things, right? But just enough so you have enough awareness so you can make prioritization decisions. So, we see a lot of engineers go from engineering to product management, and it's great because they have that technical background. They can really connect with what's going on in the team, but too much of it is also not ideal, because then you're just thinking like an engineer, and everything's like an engineering problem, right? So you have to learn a lot of those softer skills and communication, like have some understanding of like marketing and just business basics. Coming from the business side, the marketing side, I think the investment is in like, learn about how software is built these days, right? And how it's done incrementally, and make yourself comfortable working in the fine grain. Maybe build something, right? These days, like, there's so many resources for, building software, right? Obviously Galvanize is one of them. There's so many, right? You can do things online where like, just kind of walk through building of like a little Rails app or a little, mobile app or whatever, right? I think that's a necessary investment if you're coming from a non-technical background. So it just depends on the direction. There's always an investment, and you want to be somewhere in the middle.
Yep, and like that, you just have to start doing it. So if you're a developer moving into PM, moving toward, or you want to become a PM, you know the technical side really well, but maybe you don't know a lot about why the app is like it is, or how people are using things out in the world. So start digging into usage data. Start getting curious about that stuff. Start being the knowledgeable person on your team about other facets of the project. And over time, you build up sort of the second and third and fourth, fifth, sixth legs of that, not tripod anymore, but hexapod that is really the basis of a PM skill. You just have to start somewhere and start digging into it. Yeah,
they captured it great. The only other thing I'd add is passion. I think it's a hard job. I think it's it's usually you're not able to actually create any of the things that happen with your product. Everyone else is creating them. You're sort of coordinating it. That can be challenging. So you need to have a passion for the product. So don't be a PM if you're not passionate about the product. Go be a PM somewhere where you are passionate about the product.
One more thing I'll throw in from when I started making that heading in that direction myself. I actually didn't know product manager was a thing when I started doing it. So I had a panic attack that I used to be a developer and my resume was a list of languages and things I had built. And look, I can whiteboard code for you. I'm a good coder. PM is a bunch of soft skills. And it's terrifying at first that you've now soft skilled yourself out of any one job. It's like jack of all trades. But there is a really valuable combination of skills that you just have to sort of set your eyes on and go for.
Well, one thing that kind of stands out for me is to see people going from more kind of traditional sort of business or even product management or marketing roles into what we kind of see as the ideal product manager, product owner is sort of kind of being able to operate at a high level, thinking big, right, vision, drop down, and then think in a little detail and think incrementally, right? It's like, think big and shoot for big things, but then you have to map that and translate that to incremental progress, right? And that kind of goes hand in hand with writing good stories, right? And in Tracker or whatever, right? We want to solve some specific problem around engagement or make it so that PMs can report progress to their stakeholders, but what does that actually mean? What are we going to start with, right? We start here, then we'll go here, and then we'll go here. Oh, but we're going to discover something here, so then at that point we're going to maybe go in this direction when you get there. So taking the big picture thinking and I can do research, I can capture these big things in a document, but great, now let's talk about how to actually get there. Where do we start? And maybe using things like imagining kind of the life in a day of whatever the persona is there's a progression, right? And to me, that's the biggest thing. It's going from, well, we want to be there, right? Or we want it to be awesome, or we want, but how are we going to get there, right? Without going too far, you're not the engineer, right? You shouldn't be specifically well, we're going to do this exact thing on the left side of this, that, okay, leave that up for design, product design, and engineering to solve the hows, the specific hows, but you have to actually think through the product incrementally and how it's going to get from where it is here or now to whatever the ideal is, whatever the goal is.
I just want to thank all three of you again for being here today. Let's stand up and take a bow, product managers. So I'm going to run around with the mic and give it to whoever has questions. Thank you guys again for being here today. And let's open it up.
One thing I wanted to add is I think if you want the best one-page overview of what product management is, look up Ben Horowitz's Good Product Manager, Bad Product Manager. It's maybe 20 years old right now, but I think it still resonates. And I'll tweet it afterwards if you have trouble finding the link. So.
We only have a few minutes, so if we don't get to your question, feel free to send me an email at jared@galvanize.com. It's JARDD@galvanize.com, and I'll ping one of these three, and we'll tweet it out. We'll tweet out the answers.
So most of what you've been talking about is very software focused. Do you have anything that you would change in your answers generally for products that are hardware?
Don't know. Software is what I know, so it's what I understand. Hardware always seemed like a big, scary pain because of the development time involved and sort of the amount of bake-in that you have. I think one thing that goes across any product, whether it's software, hardware, whether you're making bridges, knitting hats, whatever, is the ability to test things before you build them. So hardware, more than anything, you need to have a strong idea of the strengths and weaknesses of what you're building ahead of time, and really invest in that level of planning, so that you don't get halfway through a production cycle where you actually have things that you can't change and you find out after the fact.
And some of the stuff still applies, right? Framing problems, understanding needs, who's this for, right? And trying to keep the cycles as short as physically possible given manufacturing cycles and all that, right? But yeah, I mean, communicating, right? So keeping a vision, reacting to things as they happen, like a lot of that stuff can apply to pretty much any, any project in my mind.
Probably project. Okay. Hi. So I was wondering how you guys all, and how you have in the past, measure and prove progress with the product team, whether it's individual products themselves, but KPIs, I guess.
Just shortly, the important thing there is, again, broken record about objectives. So measure things in terms of what that feature or change or product is supposed to do, or what you wanted it to do for your business. It's really tempting to measure things in clicks and numbers of users, but ultimately you need to look at that bottom line of what goal were you trying to accomplish by getting those clicks, by getting those number of users. It's just a really easy pitfall. There's a term, let's see if I can remember this. There are measures of effectiveness, and there are measures of, I forget the other one. Measures of use, I guess it is, something like along those lines. You need to be looking at those measures of effectiveness. Did it achieve the objective, rather than is it used?
Yeah, I think the other way to describe that is you want metrics that prove value and that prove growth. So you want to have, ideally, I don't think you can really optimize more than 3 to 5 metrics unless you're doing it for just like one hypothesis. But from a macro level, have 3 to 5 metrics, half for that are testing value and half that are testing growth, if that's helpful.
And I'm not sure if you meant like metrics specifically around the product, right? Like how well is the product
Team
doing?
itself.
Right, team itself, yeah, I mean, that's interesting, and that's actually something that we're really trying to focus on, right? Like how do you measure that your team is doing well, right? Or your project or whatever, but let's say it's a team because that's really what it comes down to. So what are the things that you want to improve, and are they improving? Is there I don't know if you're familiar with New Relic. New Relic is like an application performance monitoring tool that everybody uses. It's really great. But like, what's the New Relic for your team, right? How do you know that things are improving, that you're working better, right? And there are some, they're kind of just like semi-standard Agile metrics that you can look at, right? Like, how long does it take you to work through stories or features, right? Is that getting worse or better, right? How often are you shipping, right? Are you shipping continuously? Like, is that actually changing? Are you starting to slow down because you have more of a heavy process, right? How much churn is there, right? How many rejections on stories? These are not all necessarily, clear as to what's sort of better or worse. It's more, how are these changing and why? And try to uncover some of these, trends that might be indicating some things that are maybe hiding. Maybe you need to move some people around. Maybe you have too many people on one team. There's too many, lines of communication. So, but that's a very interesting, area, and I think there hasn't been that much focus on it yet.
Do you have time? Okay, so as someone who wants to get into product management, but kind of sort of just has all these soft skills that you guys mentioned, what are practical ways to market yourself to get into a position? It's hard to apply when your resume is just this conglomeration of random things. So I guess what would you guys look for in hiring?
Well, since I'm holding this and we're trying to hire product owners. Definitely it starts with like you show some enthusiasm and interest and passion in what we do, right? If somebody just sends a resume that's like, I did all these things, especially when there's a broad spectrum, it's just immediately like, we're not sure what this person is really looking for. Are they just throwing their resume, everywhere, right? So, and that's more general. That goes for like pretty much any, like I'm applying for a job. You have to make it relevant to the person who's, on the receiving end, right? And even if you don't have a lot of experience in that particular area, right? If you show that you have a lot of enthusiasm, and here's why you're interested in working at, so-and-so company, because I have seen your product in use here, and I saw the results that it had, and I really want to be part of that. I want to make it better. I don't have a ton of experience, but I do have some of these relevant pieces, and I want to learn, and this is the area that I think, or this is the place where I think I can get that learning. Like, that comes across so strongly, right? When the person takes the time to really kind of capture that, and it's not easy to put that into words sometimes, especially when you don't have necessarily a lot of like concrete, experience to base it on, but it really gets at least my attention. I know this is what stands out for a lot of the other sort of hiring, managers. It's like, this person took the time to tell me why they're interested in working here. In the very least, I want to have a conversation with this person, and that's already a door that's open.
I know when we're hiring junior PMs, even first-time PMs, what can help is using PM-like language on your resume, as superficial as that sounds. If you're a developer and you're listing off your accomplishments as a developer, so a developer, it's I built X, Y, and Z. But if you instead list it as, I built a feature that contributed this to the bottom line of the company, that accomplished this, now you're speaking our language, right? And when a PM resume looks very much like that, I raised sales 6%, I led the team to do, to accomplish these things. So speaking the right language, that just communicates that you're coming at this from the right mindset. We've hired business analysts, we've hired developers that come at it from that way. The other thing, developers can get involved with open source projects, with GitHub, that sort of, GitHub, and just look up a project on GitHub, you can see a developer's experience. So it's harder for PMs. If you have the technical skills to implement something yourself though, and then you can do that and sort of cast yourself into the role of, look, I came up with this, I analyzed the business opportunity, I came up with the core features, defined an MVP. It gives you at least a context in which to discuss those things. Not easy, it takes a ton of time, but just one approach.
Yeah, I'll add another, so we got the approach, the resume, and then I think, let's say you get the interview, I highly recommend do a ton of research on the company and come in with a perspective on it and some ideas. The best people I've hired, we ended up spending the whole time talking about the interview about how they would improve the product or how they understood the users. And at the end of the interview, I realized, like, oh my God, like I don't know anything about you, but you know a ton about us, and I want to hire you. So I think, if you get the approach right, get the resume right, and get that interview, not all interviews will go that way, but be prepared for that and come with a perspective, come with ideas, come with enthusiasm for that product, and that will make you stand out.
I've never hired PMs, but being on the opposite side of the table, coming from like doing marketing at Uber and getting hired by Eric and Mike at Compost, ask for a creative assignment. So if you get the interview, or even make one of your own, even if they don't ask you for it. So by that I mean, I would improve this part of the product in this way. Or given these circumstances, I would do this, and lay out some research, do some research, know the product really well, like Natty said. But I interviewed with a couple companies before working at Compost. One of them was Upworthy. And at Upworthy, they gave me this intense creative exercise where I had to like prioritize all the features in the roadmap and like design a feature from scratch and do a wireframe and lay out my spec and just do all this stuff. And Compost asked me to do the same thing. So I'd already had some practice doing that, and I nailed that exercise. So I'd say, be ready to do that. And if they don't have that in the interview process, ask for it, because it's really good practice, and it'll let you flex your creative problem solving.
Also mentioned that hiring managers are it's really hard on the PM position because it's a hard job to list the concrete skills for. Hiring managers don't know what the hell they're looking for in a resume. So it's a position where networking probably has a greater effect than most others. Jared does that really well. We learned about him because he knew Mike, and I think made it a point to get to know Mike for that reason, and it worked out great. More than an engineer, more than any other position where it's easy to say, here are the languages I know, you kind of have to introduce yourself, because if it goes through HR, you might just die in a stack.
Thank you so much, everybody.